I got to know a lot of school superintendents and principals this year. You know why? Swastikas on playgrounds, swastikas on bathroom walls and ceilings, swastikas and hateful words on school property. It's not that these were firsts, far from it, but there were so many this year. So many letters from schools and so many questions from parents and students. Did they directly name anti-Semitism or duck the issue and refer to various forms of offensive speech? Did they call it a swastika or merely an offensive symbol? Was the incident followed up with any kind of learning for the community, any chance to process for Jewish students and staff? And so we navigated our anger and sadness and worry following the brutal attacks in Israel on October 7th. We also had to navigate our own anger and sadness and worry about surging anti-Semitism all around us, right here at home. And not just in schools, of course, but in our places of work, by organizations we had supported, media outlets, institutions of higher learning, and from the mouths of celebrities, politicians, and in some cases, even our friends. What is happening? How do we live with this reality and respond? What can we do? The numbers from both the FBI and the ADL, which report striking increases in both criminal and non-criminal acts of hate against Jews, reflect a dark and frightening reality. Many of us have become accustomed to some anti-Semitism. I spoke about it 5 years ago on Yom Kippur in response to what was then an increase in anti-Semitic rhetoric and behavior, and after the year that had included the march in Charlottesville, Virginia. But since October 7th, I have been struck by an especially painful shift. Many of the people we considered our spiritual allies, those with whom we built partnerships to fight racism and bigotry, alongside whom we rallied following the murder of George Floyd, and after the Supreme Court issued the Dobbs decision striking down Roe v. Wade. These so-called allies have been at best silent, and at worst perpetrators of the public anti-Semitism that has plagued this past year. This was both disappointing and disorienting. Where were our friends, our allies, whose marches we joined, whose stories we took on as our own, whose fundraisers we promoted, whose institutions we supported? And why were these one-time friends showing support for Hamas, of all the illiberal, intolerant, irredeemable groups in the world? Why were they using the war to amplify anti-Semitism? As journalist David Frum observed, within days of the terror attack and before any major military response, American campuses and other progressive spaces erupted in anti-Israel protests. And Franklin Foer noted in The Atlantic, impassioned support for the Palestinian cause metastasized into the hatred of Jews. Notice the sleight of hand, how anger at the Israeli government seemed so easily to mutate into hatred directed at all Jews anywhere. So a new kind of exhaustion started to set in. The anti-Semitism I had experienced in my life before October 7th was sporadic and navigable, if unpleasant, discrete events with discrete and appropriate reactions. 2 examples. In elementary school, when I was called the word that rhymes with pike. Another, when an ignorant high school student asked me where I had hidden my horns. Even then, I could liken these episodes to a drizzling rain, which leaves you damp, but you quickly dry. This year has felt more like a drenching deluge that leaves us feeling like we will never be able to shake the chill from our bones? Is it safe to wear my Jewish star outside my sweater? Can I use my real name for my Starbucks order? Is it safe to travel overseas? Is it safe to hang a mezuzah on my dorm room door? Is it even safe to come to Barnert? Journalist Noah Feldman offers language for what has changed, noting the chameleon-like nature of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has managed to reinvent itself multiple times throughout history, each time keeping some of the old tropes around, while simultaneously creating new ones, adapting to the present circumstances. In each iteration, anti-Semitism reflects the ideological preoccupations of the moment. In anti-Semitic discourse, Jews are always made to exemplify what a given group of people considers to be the worst failure of the social order in which they live. In this way, crucially, anti-Semitism is not and has never been about actual Jews, so much as anti-Semites' imagination of them. Once we were depicted as bankers with hooked noses. Today we are maligned as racists, oppressors, and settler colonialists. Think back just a few months when college students struggled to walk to class without harassment or to make and maintain friends as they were tagged with labels that have no connection to their identities because they were proudly Jewish or dared to voice support for Israel. They were branded as genocidal, fascist, or just plain evil. In the face of this reality, how are we to live and to respond? Wise words from our sages suggest that we take care in how we listen and how we respond, especially when we are understandably worked up. They teach, make your ears like a funnel and acquire for yourself an understanding heart. Ears like a funnel, so that we can take it all in, giving due attention to what's really happening. Tune out the protesters shouting their slogans and social media warriors blitzing the internet with images and words that have only a loose connection to facts and reason. Make your ears like a funnel. Pay attention, but don't get distracted by all the noise. And acquire an understanding heart. Interestingly, the rabbis were probably not making a plea for greater empathy here. In our tradition, the heart, lev in Hebrew, is usually used to mean the head or the mind. So what the rabbis really want us to do is develop stronger critical thinking skills. Listen carefully and process rationally. Report incidents to the ADL and to the police, Hillel directors, school administrators, and college presidents. And remember that these professionals are your allies, not your enemies. So please don't beat them up for doing their jobs. Insist that when reporting, the language used is accurate and descriptive, not frantic or exaggerated. Speak up when we see anti-Semitism in all of its insidious forms. Teach our kids to ask for help. When you hear or see someone perpetrating anti-Semitic tropes or pushing false information, firmly but calmly push back and correct the record. Make our ears like a funnel, our minds understanding. This is a big ask, especially when we are tired and scared and things feel bleak. We are activated right now, and when we are on high alert, everything looks and feels like a threat. One afternoon in mid-June, I received a bunch of messages about something that had been printed in a local yearbook, one of many concerns about things printed in yearbooks last year. A graduating senior, not Jewish, lifted a line attributed to Anne Frank as his yearbook quote. Only unfortunately, he misquoted her, and further, he gave the mistaken impression that he was making light of the hostage situation in Gaza. He wasn't, but to some, that's how it looked. People in the Jewish community got wind of it, and to put it mildly, started to freak out. The school, the whole district, had already had its fair share of anti-Semitic incidents in the prior months, and people were understandably on high alert. I get it. I really do. And fortunately, some people in our community had the good sense to put their rabbi on the case. So a few weeks later, this student and his mother were sitting in my office. A campaign had been launched against him and his family. He had made a mistake, had quoted someone he had never heard of, having found the quote on social media, of course, and without the necessary context, had misinterpreted its meaning. He had done something ignorant, not anti-Semitic. In our conversation, I learned that a letter had been circulated by members of the local Jewish community to the university where this student had been recruited to play football, informing them of the incident and insisting that the school revoke his acceptance. His father's place of employment had been targeted, lobbying that he should lose his job. And the student's photo with the offending quote had been shared all over social media, ginning up thousands of people to harass him, including with threats of permanent injury. Just this month, a different local high school hosted their annual club fair. The next day, a story spread about an altercation between students affiliated with the Jewish Student Union and the Muslim Student Association. Long story short, some students at the event had a heated exchange over symbols that seemed to have triggered outrage, and eventually both groups removed all such emblems from their club displays. Unfortunately, this story, the true story, isn't the story that got circulated. Rumors began to spread like wildfire, eventually finding their way into an article in the New York Post, a publication not regularly known for its subtlety. The story that made it to the news reported that the school had prohibited wearing yellow ribbons on October 7th in solidarity with the hostages. Even after the superintendent sent a letter clarifying that no such action had been taken, the community was already worked up. In the end, parents and professionals spent a great deal of emotional energy and valuable time worrying about and responding to a problem that didn't exist, and the media ended up amplifying a false narrative. And this has distracted us from conversations about really important concerns with which, in particular, members of the Jewish and Israeli communities are struggling, around how the presence or absence of particular symbols impact their feeling of safety and worth. And by the way, on Monday of this past week, which was October 7th, many students there chose to wear yellow ribbons and even drape themselves in Israeli flags without any protest from the administration. Leaving aside the missed opportunities to control the narratives in these situations before they got out of hand, as well as the curriculum I wish had been in place for the yearbook student to have learned about Anne Frank at any point before his senior year of high school, I have been thinking about the Jewish community's response, a response reflective of the activated and agitated state in which we are living. We are on high alert, and for good reason. But we need to be careful that we are listening and still processing with discerning ears and rational minds, so that we don't endanger others and inadvertently lose opportunities to join with viable partners. From our Musar tradition, a centuries-old discipline of moral character development, we are taught to open the space between the match and the fuse. Take time before we respond. Use our ears and our heads, and also our hearts. Stretch out that space of possibility. Breathe and pause before we react. Sometimes we need to ignite a flame, but often we don't. Once the match reaches the fuse and the flame is ignited, we have missed our chance to be reflective and discerning, to ask questions, to figure out what a moment requires of us and how we can be the most effective builders of the world that could be. This is hard, and this is holy. So what is there to do? We can stay engaged with and connected to our Jewish community. We can be thoughtful advocates of truth, reason, and respectful dialogue. And we can become golems. Yes, golems. The golem is a giant humanoid figure from Jewish folklore, said to have been summoned when the Jewish people were threatened. How great that our rabbis, not exactly known for brute strength or intimidating size, cooked up an enormous monster that came to life when 3 letters, Aleph, Mem, Tav, were carved into its forehead of clay. These letters spell emet, or truth, and are also stitched onto our beautiful High Holy Day Torah covers. The golem doesn't live forever, even in our collective superhero imagination. When its work is done, and the Jewish community again is safe and sound, the letter Aleph disappears from the golem's head, leaving 2 letters, Mem and Tav, turning emet, or truth, into met, meaning dead. Adam Mansbach breathed new life into the idea of the golem in September of last year, in fact, 2 weeks before October 7th, in response to already rising anti-Semitism. The golem represents vigilance against the inevitable cyclical return of injustice, he wrote. His myth is born of understanding that anti-Semitism is ineradicable, that as long as there are people who feel embittered about their lives, constrained by forces they cannot control, they will come to blame the Jews and then to enact violence upon us. Perhaps there has only ever been one golem, he suggests, and this golem remembers every previous iteration of itself. The ancestral memory makes him a walking repository of memory and trauma, not an empty vessel, but an exceedingly full one. So he challenges us. In the absence of a giant clay superhero, our only choice is to become the golems we need. Our golem embodiment today is less about physical confrontation and more about the strength found in standing up to age-old hatred and our determination to keep living as lights unto the nations and healers of an aching world. It is up to us to be champions for goodness and morality, for truth and light, especially when times are dark. Emet, truth, our Torah reminds us, gives life, not only to the golem, but also to each of us. Carry the collective memories of all that we have overcome, and use our people's shared experience to bring our emet, our truth, as we navigate the complicated world before us. It may seem like an unusual challenge to find our inner, modern, nonviolent golem this year, but I hope it will remind us of our purpose, that when mixed with our humanity and our Jewish calling to be lights, will give us the strength to embody joyful, hopeful Jewish living. The golem was summoned in times when the Jewish community felt especially threatened. And these are indeed Yamim Noraim, a phrase that is usually translated days of awe, but which literally means days of fear. This year, more than others, these dual meanings need not dual. We are, in fact, living both days of fear and days of awe. One of my teachers, Dr. Betsy Stone, says that trauma changes the trajectory of a life. Communal trauma changes the trajectory of history. This is a year of communal trauma. It is safe to say we do not yet know how it will change the trajectory of our communal lives that will one day become our history. we do know that we have a role in how we respond every single day. Will we tell the story of Yir'ah as fear, how trauma led us to fear, to building higher walls and thicker bunkers, to acts of retribution or revenge? Because it's worth pointing out that we are also living in a time and place when it is better than it has ever been to be Jewish. Never have we had more of a role to play in the unfolding story of our people. Never have we had more energy or enthusiasm for the great task ahead. Centered in this aspect of the present moment, we might tell the story of Yir'ah as awe, how our trauma brought us together, clarified the way each of us is needed, and inspired us to create bright and durable, joyful Jewish lives. Barnert B. Mitzvah students this year wrote passionately about how much they love being Jewish. Here are some of their words. I feel so special. Being Jewish is very important to me. I love that I am part of a people that has survived so much. I can't wait to pass on the traditions of my family to my future children. I feel so lucky to be Jewish. Being a Jew matters so much, especially now. Having a Jewish upbringing has helped me to understand that the world can sometimes be cruel and other times loving, and all you can do is try to make it a better place. Brett Stevens agrees. Just last week, he opined to have been born a Jew is the single most fortunate thing that ever happened to me. It is a priceless, moral, spiritual, intellectual, and emotional inheritance from my ancestors, some of whom were slaughtered for it. It is a precious bequest to my children, who will find different ways to make it their own. It is therefore worth the time it takes to explore, and worth the cost, including, tragically, the cost of bigotry and violence it so often extracts. So last Friday afternoon, one of those school superintendents called to wish me a Happy New Year, to ask if I'd think with him about how the schools might observe the first anniversary of October 7th, and to check in about how we were all doing after the year that we've had. And when I opened up my email after Rosh Hashanah, I saw a note from the yearbook student's mother. Dear Rabbi Steiner, happy Rosh Hashanah. I responded to her, and she wrote back to me immediately. Thank you so much for your response. How are you doing? Is there anything I can do to support you in any way? Yes, these are dark days, and I wish I could just flip on the light switch. But in the absence of such sorcery, let's help each other to find the opportunities to slow down, to listen, and to learn together. Let's help one another to lengthen the distance between the match and the fuse, to work and find our allies. Let's be golems, standing up for ourselves, our community, our tradition, and our truth. And let's remember our newest Jewish adults who tell us that despite it all, they love being Jewish. Gemar Chatima Tova.